Boruto chapter 15 drops some absolute bombshells. We finally find out about Amado's plans for the future and his true intentions with Kawaki. We see Code add another huge L to his ever-growing resume, which, come on guys, what did you expect from this guy? We get to see how insanely overpowered the new Shinju Ryu is, and Boruto and Kawaki have finally teamed up to fight against Jura. But how do we even get to this point? Well, chapter 15 begins with a flashback to what exactly happened with Shinki and Gaara that led to Shinki becoming a Shinju. It seems as though Gaara and his team were trying to track down Boruto's location, and they managed to pinpoint it down to one of Orochimaru's lairs. However, it seems as though the genjutsu the Kashin Koji placed on the hideout itself has come in clutch, since we can see them despite finding the actual hideout, they were unable to track down Kashin Koji, and it's almost as if they got lost while searching the area. Anyways, we can see that Gaara has used his sand sealing technique to lock Shinki away, but obviously concerned for his father, Shinki yells at Gaara to free him from the sand. But Gaara just refuses and reiterates that they must escape without him, and he will use the sand to carry them to the entrance where they can all escape. And we can see that Gaara has clearly taken a pretty heavy blow from Matsuri, as he is clutching his stomach whilst blood is still pouring out. Matsuri tells him that she just doesn't care about these guys, and she was simply looking for Boruto and his associate, but they just so happen to cross paths. Matsuri then tells Gaara that he should be more concerned about the gaping hole in his stomach rather than the kids behind him. But Gaara replies, saying that these kids are the future of the Sand Village, and if it means that he has to exchange his own life to allow them to survive, then he is willing to make that sacrifice. Now this is pretty important, as it brings that idea of the newer generation always exceeding the capabilities of the prior generation, and Gaara is clearly a big believer in that ideology, as he has a lot of faith in these kids bringing about a bright future for their world and the Sand Village, and he is willing to sacrifice his own life in order to protect them, as he believes that they are capable of surpassing him in the future. This was a pretty huge theme in Boruto Part 1, especially towards the end, where it started off as a shared story between Naruto and Boruto, but as the story progresses onwards, we can see how the story has transitioned from the previous generation to the new one, and it was always emphasized that the new generation would always surpass the next. So I think that moment of self-sacrifice is pretty vital to the story to showcase that idea. Shinki was still having none of it, and he uses Iron Sand to break free from the sand prison that Gaara had made, and right as his father was about to get consumed or bitten by one of the claw grimes, Shinki weaves a hand sign for his own sealing jutsu, which engulfs Gaara entirely, where it seems as though, similar to the Daikokuten realm, time does not move forward, and hence Gaara's state does not deteriorate. Shinki tells Gaara that he is more important for the Sand Village than he will be, clearly not understanding his own potential that Gaara saw from within him. Matsuri sends one of the claw grimes after Shinki, and whilst he is still doing the hand signs, one of the claw grimes pounces on him and immediately turns him into a tree. But it seems as though Shinki is still holding up the hand signs in order to maintain that prison, which will be an extremely interesting factor later in this chapter. This pisses off Matsuri, as he realizes that Shinki is required to undo this sealing, but since he is now a tree, there is no way to get Gaara outside of that prison. Now the most glaring thing about this whole scene was the fact that Shinki was in the process of saving Gaara, or sacrificing himself, when he was consumed by a claw grime. And if you think back to chapter 5, where we saw the flashback of Sasuke and Boruto fighting Code and the claw grimes, Sasuke did a similar thing by sacrificing himself in order to save Boruto. Then if we go back again to chapter 12 of 2 Blue Vortex, when Boruto told Konoha that Moegi had become a Shinju as well, Konoha thought back to the quote-unquote festival. This implies to me that something went down at the festival that led to Moegi having to save Konoha from being consumed by a claw grime, because that moment had such a distinct impact on Konoha that as soon as Boruto mentioned the claw grime and Moegi, Konoha knew exactly what moment, as if it was a mental scar constantly playing on his mind. So if you can see where I'm getting at here, it's almost as if there is a connection between the user's emotions at the time of being consumed and the likelihood of them becoming a Shinju. And when you think slightly more deeply into this, the connection between these two things begins to make a lot more sense. So as many of you know, in Naruto, a user's emotions is directly linked to their chakra, since you have yin chakra, which is spiritual energy, and yang chakra, which is physical energy. So when someone is experiencing a strong emotion, it means that there is a direct response in their chakra nature that comes along with that emotion. And I believe that it's because when you see each of these people sacrificing themselves, the emotions they feel at that time causes a change in chakra, or a wave in yin chakra to overcome that person. And this wave of yin chakra mixes with the claw grime to create a humanoid Shinju. And the reason this works is because the Ten Tails creature doesn't experience any emotions. It is purely physical energy or yang chakra. It means that when you take that energy and combine it with yin chakra, it allows the clawgram itself to almost evolve to gain those emotions, and hence why they are able to experience a consciousness. Anyways, getting back to the chapter, we then cut to the Hokage office where Shikamaru and Kankuro are discussing what they need to do in order to free Shinki. Kankuro explains that unless Shinki is returned, there is no way to free Gaara from that seal, so they need Konoha's help to get Shinki back to his original form so they can end up saving Gaara. Shikamaru then confirms that they are currently working on a formula to counter the treeification process. And yes, that is what I'm dubbing this process. If you got a problem with that, then suck it up, because that's a new official name for it, and I want to see all of you guys from now on formally regard this as a treeification process. Anyways, Kankuro ends this conversation there, and Shikamaru talks to Sarada and Sumire and tells them that if they come into contact with Boruto at any point, they need to tell him immediately, as Shikamaru likely wants to gather more intel for countermeasures in order to aid the Sand Village in rescuing Shinki. But among this entire conversation, we can see a little toad below Shikamaru's feet listening in on this entire conversation. This is very interesting, as it actually gives us a good idea about the extent of Kashin Koji's ability to gather information. And this goes beyond Ada's Senrigan, where she can only view one location at a time, as well as any past events. But Kashin Koji has shown here that he is actually even more broken than Ada was. But the chapter then jumps to the Shinju realm, where Ryu is standing on top of the chakra cube, looking hella dripped out, if I must say so myself. Ikemoto has been cooking up an absolute storm with these character designs, and I've seen many fans are loving this change in the series. Fashion has many purposes in the manga, and Ikemoto is managing to use fashion as a personification of that person's ideals and personality, which really adds a layer of depth behind many characters in Two Blue Vortex. Anyways, if you remember back to last chapter, where Jura said welcome Ryu, obviously establishing the new Shinju's name, Ryu then asked Jura that what he just called him now was supposed to be his name, to which Jura replies saying that it's just a name that he gave him in order to establish his identity, and is necessary as the most basic piece of information for this Shinju. But Ryu was having none of it, and he was like, nah, this name is trash, I liked my other one, which is the beginning of a theme played on slightly later in the chapter of Ryu almost defying Jura as if he doesn't want to be pushed around by this guy. Anyways, Ryu notices something sticking out of the chakra cube, and it turns out to be Code, who clearly got curious and wanted to spy on the Shinju. Ryu summons Sand and rips Code out of the chakra cube and into the Shinju reading area, where Jura holds his reading classes for all of his students to teach them how to obey their master. Ryu then holds Code by the neck using his iron sand, while Code just kind of struggles and wriggles about. But the way Ryu is so casual about this, but Jura is actually worried about Code because he thinks Ryu might actually kill Code from using too much force. Now, wasn't this guy Code the same person who was supposed to surpass Jigen? The same Jigen that gave every Naruto fan freaking PTSD after he put our favorite duo in a spin cycle like it was nothing. That same Jigen. And Code is supposed to have strength beyond that, because right now I'm really not seeing that idea whatsoever. But it must be said that the reason the writers are likely doing this is to show how strong the threats are becoming in Boruto compared to the previous threats that the other generations were faced with. And it goes back to the idea of the previous generation surpassing the next, like I mentioned at the start of the video, as we can see that even the strongest two characters in Naruto Shippuden are borderline useless compared to the average character in Two Blue Vortex. But Jura says that he's grateful for Code, as Code is directly responsible for them coming to life, but he asks Code why he's actually spying on them. Code then says, whilst gasping for air mind you, what exactly do you intend on doing? And he makes sure that they aren't trying to eat the Otsutsuki, as that will be a conflict of interest, as Code only cares about creating a chakra fruit and carrying out Ishiki's will. Jura replies that he does eventually want to do this, but for now he wants to focus on other things, and for some reason he is deliberately putting off the Otsutsukis. But Jura tells Code that Kawaki is good enough food for them, so he wants Code to kill Boruto as it will do them a favor. There's a back and forth here between Code and Jura, where Code is just being a little runt and trying to establish his dominance over Jura, and before Jura can even respond at one point, he goes white karma mode and sticks his arm into the claw mark and out of Jura's claw mark cloth and goes to swipe at Jura's face. But this absolute chad of an entity keeps his hand in his pocket and is like, bitch, know your place, and blows off Code's hand in an instant from using the BG laser bomb from his eye. He then says to Code that he's once again grateful to him giving them a freedom to think, and Jura goes on to say Code's life is lacking a little bit of excitement, and in order to spice up Code's life, how about a cheeky assignment? And he tells Code to kill Boruto and his associate, and in return, he will give Code the chakra fruit he so desires. And it just goes from worse to worse for Code, as the Shinju just start laughing at him as he seals up his amputated arm with his claw marks. Code says to Jura that this is a contract and he will do what Jura wants, but Jura must fulfill his side of the promise, and on that note, Code leaves while saying that he will be the one to have the last laugh. This entire interaction was just a clown fiasco, and I wouldn't be surprised if Jura is just trying to hire a jester to his forces at this point, because it's clear that he has no respect for Code whatsoever, and he is just doing this for Code purely out of pity. Anyways, Ryu asks Jura if he can kill Code the next time he sees him, and Jura says yes, that's your choice, you have the freedom to do whatever you want to do. But straight after that, he tells Ryu instead of focusing on Code, he should instead focus on listening to his instincts and to see the face of who he wants to target in order to devour. However, this moment is a very telling sign that Jura is manipulating all of these Shinju to do exactly what he wants. And Boruto confirms in chapter 14 when he calls Jura the puppeteer, and also the point where he said that if they were to get rid of Jura, then the Shinju would lack purpose, and hence the threat of the Shinju would cease to exist. So I think it will be extremely interesting to see whether Jura will end up becoming the betrayer of his own people in order to fulfill his actual goal, whatever that may be. Anyways, Ryu confirms that his target is Gaara, and he suggests that he knows a way to release the sealing jutsu Shinki used to hide Gaara away. But the chapter then moves on to Boruto, who is sat on top of the Hokage monument as Kawaki approaches him from behind. Boruto makes sure that Kawaki came alone, and Kawaki assures him that yes, he is on his own, although Ada, the nosy bitch, is probably looking in on the conversation. Boruto asks Kawaki why he hasn't jumped straight to attacking him, but Kawaki just ignores him and asks Boruto why he didn't tell Konoha the truth about what actually happened regarding him and Kawaki swapping places. Boruto replies saying that even if he did, it wouldn't do any good to their situation, as some will believe the story and others will not, which will lead to confusion, and Konoha will simply devolve into chaos if that was the case. So Boruto is simply trying to avoid that so the village can focus on the actual threat to them, which is the Shinju. Boruto also says that Konoha is simply carrying out the proper procedures if there was a traitor who had committed treason against their leader. But at the same time, he really isn't worried since he has gained unimaginable strength to the point where nobody inside of Konoha can do anything to him that threatens his life. Kawaki swiftly moves on and decides to talk about his favorite topic, Momoshiki. He asks Boruto what actually happened to Momoshiki, and he said he assumes the whole karma situation still hasn't been resolved since he last saw Boruto 3 years ago. He then also says that as far as he is aware, Boruto still cannot control his karma, and Boruto finally explains what the fans have been anticipating for a while now, exactly what happened that caused Boruto to be so terrified of this power. Boruto explains that around 2 years ago, when he fought Code with Sasuke, for the first time since he left the village, he tried to use his karma. This was likely because him and Sasuke were at a disadvantage to Code in terms of power, so as a last-ditch effort, Boruto tried to activate this ability. But he said when he tried to, he immediately felt the sensation of being taken over by Momoshiki, or at least he felt a feeling very reminiscent of what he felt previously. He describes it as a sensation of dying while still maintaining consciousness, and since then he has refused to use his karma. And this explanation does make complete sense as to why Boruto doesn't want to use his karma, since when you think about the moment in chapter 5 when Boruto apologizes to Sasuke as if he has made some sort of mistake, we see Sasuke almost being forced as a last-ditch option to sacrifice himself in order to save Boruto. Now previously we weren't 100% sure on what this mistake was, but it turns out it was actually Boruto attempting to use his karma, which caused him likely to have a lapse of concentration whilst he felt that sensation of being taken over that caused Code to pounce at this opportunity, and Sasuke was forced to step in and sacrifice himself in order to save Boruto. And that is why not only does Boruto have the prior guilt of using the karma, being taken over by Momoshiki and hurting people, but now he has on top of that the guilt of using his karma being directly responsible for having his master killed or sealed away. So the guilt that weighs on this power is a massive mental barrier that he is unable to overcome, despite him needing to use his ability in order to beat the threat of the Shinju. Boruto then explains that Momoshiki has been completely silent for the past 3 years now, however the activation of his karma is what he believes brings out Momoshiki. Now this is very, very interesting, as if you remember towards the end of Boruto Part 1, Momoshiki would be able to take over much more frequently compared to when Boruto had just awakened that power. But do you know what also increased towards the end of Boruto Part 1? The amount Boruto himself would use the karma as his main power. Boruto realized many times that the threats that he was being presented with were far too strong for him to deal with in his base, and he almost became fully reliant on using his karma to deal with whatever threat there was at hand. And he became more and more reliant on the power of the karma, meaning he would use that ability much more frequently. Far more often than he would when Boruto gained the karma seal itself, where Boruto didn't really know how to use the power and would rarely actually use the ability. Also, the conditions it seemed for Momoshiki to manifest became much less towards the end of the series. But Momoshiki's manifestations became so large after the Karma V2 that soon after Boruto recovered, Sasuke and Kawaki were both able to sense Momoshiki's presence, or in Kawaki's case, he was even able to see him. That's how intense Momoshiki's resurgence was actually in Boruto's body. However, with Boruto not using the power for 3 years, he has almost buried Momoshiki's soul deep from within himself, meaning that Momoshiki isn't a problem whilst he is still in his base. But it still doesn't give us a way going forward as to how Boruto is going to eventually use the power of the karma, since it is implied that as soon as Boruto uses the ability, Momoshiki returning is almost inevitable. So perhaps Boruto is going to be forced to use his power as almost a last resort, or for extremely short periods of time. Or it could end up being the jougan, which when it manifests, it could fully suppress Momoshiki because it's like the Otsutsuki God Dojutsu, don't forget guys. Like I'm just saying, come on Kishimoto, wouldn't that just be a splendid idea? Anyways, our monthly jougan run is over, and back to the chapter. Boruto tells Kawaki that the Shinju are extremely troublesome, but in particular, Jura is the main problem. And Boruto confirms that he is actually much weaker than Jura, which is the first bit of real scaling we have for the seemingly unscalable character. But Kawaki tells Boruto to stop dodging the conversation about Momoshiki. Boruto then says that they need to focus on the Shinju first, because if they focus on getting rid of Boruto, it will not only reduce their combined strength, but it will also be too late for them to deal with the Shinju, and it will all be over before the war even starts. Boruto then says, however, once the Shinju are gone, if he were to lose control, he tells Kawaki not to hesitate for a moment, which shows that Boruto still holds that insane guilt, like I said earlier, about the karma, and it's likely that he still views himself as a burden to this world, but he cannot just let himself die for being such a burden, because if he were to die, he couldn't ensure the security of his loved ones. That's why he believes he has to fulfill his duty of killing the Ten Tails, and then beyond that point, he is willing to come to the same resolve that he came to when he allowed Kawaki to kill him back in part 1. Boruto then goes on to say, either way, Kawaki needs to become stronger, and it would have been more ideal for Naruto to train Kawaki, but Kawaki's dumbass sealed him away, and it's far too late for anything like that now. So instead, Boruto is going to tell Kawaki what Kawaki will end up figuring out himself at some point, but the sooner Boruto tells him, the better it is for Kawaki's strength, and ultimately their situation with dealing with the Shinju. Boruto then drops the absolute bombshell and says that it was in fact Amado all along that is hiding Kawaki's true power. Kawaki is completely taken aback by this, and Boruto goes on to say, Amado's put on a limit on Kawaki's attack capabilities, his defensive capabilities, and his regenerative too. And each ability or power of Kawaki's is adjusted to be within a certain limit. We then cut to Amado, who is looking in on this whole situation through Kawaki's eyes, which did actually confuse a lot of people. But if you remember, Kawaki is a cyborg, meaning his body contains an insane amount of ninja tech, all created from Amado, meaning it shouldn't come as a surprise that within Kawaki's eyes is a camera that allows Amado to see exactly what Kawaki is seeing. Anyways, regarding the limiters Amado put on Kawaki, I'm sure many of you are wondering why Amado actually did this, and I think I have the answer. So if you think back to Kawaki's character and his karma, the reawakening of the karma itself all came from Kawaki's emotions and his insanely strong desire for power in order to protect Naruto. Subsequently, Kawaki got what he needed in the form of Karma V2, the power that allowed him to protect Naruto. However, if you remember when this ability was first unlocked, the amount of triangles within his eye made the dojutsu look incomplete. But contrary to what people thought, this wasn't the same as what happened in Jigen's case, where he was just an incomplete vessel altogether, and as a result, he could only use those white triangles. On the contrary, Kawaki was a complete vessel, and hence the triangles were orange when we saw them in the anime, which reflected the color of the complete dojutsu. But there was still the lack of all the triangles. But that actually acted as foreshadowing for this revelation, as even back then, Amado had placed a limit on Kawaki's ocular abilities. However, we saw that the more heightened Kawaki's emotions were, the more triangles that would manifest, and that was something Amado admitted himself that he could not control, and that is Kawaki's emotions, as they were the sole driving force behind his progression with the karma. But if you remember, Amado's reasoning behind giving Kawaki this karma back was also Kawaki could use it to restore his daughter, and Amado's incentive to revive revive his daughter was greater than anything you could possibly imagine. This factor led Amado into several dark corners, causing him to do terrible things as well as complete immoral practices, all in order to bring back his daughter. Remember the helplessness and dread inside of his eyes when Naruto threatened to kill Kawaki. But if this was the case, then why did Amado, the second Kawaki's karma remanifested, not use Kawaki to revive his daughter? He had the shutdown code on Kawaki. He could find where Kawaki was using his eyes or whatever ninja tech was inside of him, yet he did not do any of this. He didn't even make an attempt to get Kawaki to bring back his daughter. And this was all because the Karma V2 wasn't actually the final transformation. The entire process of bringing Amado's daughter back all relied on Kawaki's next power-up. And this also ties into why Amado gave Kawaki the limiters to his power. Amado could foresee that in that moment, the powers he allowed Kawaki to have access to would be enough to make Kawaki believe that he was insanely strong, or at least strong enough to fulfill his purpose of protecting Naruto. However, Amado also knew that in the future, the power Kawaki currently held wouldn't be enough and he would quickly be surpassed, causing Kawaki to feel that desperation for power in order to create a safe world that he can release Naruto into. So it turns out Amado was actually manipulating Kawaki into believing that he was powerless once again, and we have seen many times the insane things Kawaki's desires for strength can lead him to do. And by using this knowledge, he wants Kawaki to overcome the limiters through his emotions to the extent where he can surpass his limits and gain the next big power-up, the Karma V3. Now this power, like many of you could imagine, will hold the fabled Shinjutsu abilities, the powers of the Otsutsuki god. Anyways, I'm going to go deeper into why this power makes sense in a future video, so make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications if you are interested in being notified when that video gets released. But this entire limiter shenanigan was actually foreshadowed from the moment Kawaki unlocked Karma V2. Not only was him not having the full dojutsu our first telling sign that he was being held back artificially, since we saw later that he was able to fully unlock the dojutsu, but the foreshadowing doesn't just stop there. And in fact, all the points Boruto mentioned are actually shown in the series at different points. For example, Kawaki's attacking potency, think back to how little his attacks did to Jura, also how slow his rods were when he summoned them, where Momoshiki was able to easily dodge them, Boruto was able to do the same with his eyes closed, and Damon literally caught them in his mouth with ease, whereas when Jigen or Ishiki summoned them, they seem literally undodgeable by anyone except Baryon Mode Naruto. Then take his defensive capabilities, he got washed by Boruto in one punch, and the same goes for when he fought Jura, and he was even knocked out in one hit by Mitsuki, which I thought was a massive feat for Mitsuki, but it turns out that maybe Kawaki was just being nerfed altogether. All of these moments were actually foreshadowing for this revelation, which I think is pretty insane from the writers. Anyways, moving past this and back to the chapter, Amado thinks to himself, how on earth did Boruto get this information? But he then remembers seeing the toe through Kawaki's eyes, and he pins it all down to Kashin Koji. But at the same time, he is confused and he can't quite figure it all out, so it seems as though Amado has started to put the pieces of the puzzle together, but he still hasn't managed to figure out the entire picture, almost giving us a countdown as to when he will realize the truth and go out to hunt down Kashin Koji for meddling with his plans. And like I've been saying for a while now, Kashin Koji is not here to stay. His character is destined to die since 10 Directions and his abilities are far too overpowered for this series. But his death will also be an incredible parallel to Jiraiya's death, where he is aware that his death is imminent. However, he is going to use the rest of his life to aid his apprentice in defeating the final villain, by gathering a shinobi's greatest asset, which is information. Boruto tells Kawaki to get Amado to tell him the truth, as he has to leave for now to go deal with whatever situation Kashin Koji has likely made him aware of. Kawaki stops him before he goes away and says that his thoughts haven't changed and he still thinks Otsutsuki are the root of all evil and should be killed at all costs. But he says he trusts Boruto's intuition and agrees that they must deal with the Shinju first, and he says that he is willing to join forces with Boruto in order to defeat them. Kawaki ensures Boruto that he will catch up to him soon enough, and Boruto smiles as Kawaki says all of this and tells him not to hold back as he calls Kawaki his brother once again. So we are finally seeing the team up between these two, which has felt long overdue at this point in the story. But this is very reminiscent of Naruto Shippuden, where Sasuke and Naruto teamed up against Madara and Obito, while Sasuke still wanted to get rid of Naruto, but in order to achieve his goal, he had to team up with Naruto temporarily, even though he didn't actually like Naruto. So we are actually seeing an insane amount of parallels between the two stories, which is nice and gives me almost this feeling of nostalgia at this point, which is definitely a nice feeling. But this is where the chapter ends, and the narrator comment after all of this is, with the Shinju in sight, Boruto and Kawaki finally join forces, but how will Konoha react to the Sand Village issue? So a pretty insane chapter in my opinion, and I would love to know your guys' thoughts on the chapter or the review itself in the comments down below. All criticism is welcome, so just feel free to comment away. Anyways, if you did enjoy the video, then please consider hitting that like button. It just helps this video get pushed to more and more people, and it also lets me know that you guys are enjoying the videos. Also, if you want to see more content like this, then be sure to subscribe, just so YouTube knows to recommend my videos to you in the future, and it also just helps support the channel. All of you guys that have already subscribed, I do really appreciate each and every one of you. And let's see if we can reach 2,000 subscribers by the end of this year. But with that all said, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you all in the next one. Goodbye.